Now, we don't have much to look at in terms of pelargoniums because, well, it's January and pelargoniums are not blooming in January, certainly not if you live in the UK, they're not. Now, I've been growing pelargoniums for several years without needing to throw them out once as winter approaches, and over that time I've learned a few things along the way about how not to treat them if you want them to return and bloom for you come the springtime. So here's a short guide about those mistakes that you don't want to make. Let's get started. And we are in. Okay, so this is just a guide. This is what's worked for me. There are no hard and fast rules, as with most things plant related. So we're going to start with pruning. So the first mistake is to not prune them back. Leaving more growth on means more space for fungus. There are going to be more leaves at the expense of blooms come summertime. So the thing to do is to prune them down roughly September, October time. Now we are obviously in the middle of winter now. If you prune them now, that's okay. But because they're slow, they might take a little longer. So the thing to do is to prune them in the autumn time. Some people suggest pruning them down to about 10 or 15 centimeters. Some people suggest cutting them in half. I do about 15 to 20 centimeters with mine. That's just the way I like them to be. Some people also suggest completely defoliating them. And the good thing about that is you can get rid of any pests that you've got because they are prone to mites. But the downside, of course, is because they are slow growers, if you do it at this time of year, they're going to take a long time to come back. And of course, if your temperatures are really low, then they may not come back at all. That's why it's a good idea to do them when the temperatures are still reasonably warm. So September, if you're going to defoliate them, I wouldn't bother doing that now in January. So the next mistake is leaving botrytis-ridden leaves on the plant. If you do that, that allows it to spread, and it will spread very, very quickly. You can tell botrytis because it's simply a very furry mould, and lots of leaves and lots of stems tend to do that on pelargoniums. So what's the thing to do? Well, you need lots of ventilation. If you can open your greenhouse up, or the place where you've got your plants, then open it up on sunny days and let the air circulate around, or get yourself a fan and let the air circulate around. In my greenhouse, it's the worst possible conditions for pelargoniums because it's very humid and it's reasonably still, but I do try to have fans on, and of course I keep my eye out for anything that has botrytis on it. So if you can reduce humidity, now of course lots of plants like the humidity, but if you can reduce it, then do. I'm not talking about really, really low, nothing below about 30%. Higher than that, but really once it's getting into the 80s, as it is in here, then they don't like it. It can be done, as I'm doing, but you've really got to keep your eye out. Next mistake is potting them up. Why is that a mistake? Well, because there are many varieties, in fact practically all the varieties I've got are compact. They're bred to be small and compact. So there is a limit before they slow down the blooming. Now what I've done in the past with some of these, I've tried to get them bigger and bigger, and they've grown bigger and bigger, but I've ended up with no blooms whatsoever in the summertime, just a great big bushy leafy plant. The thing to do is of course prune them and pot them up only if they absolutely need it, and I would make sure that you only put it in a very slightly bigger pot. It depends how big you want them to be. Something this size I would not ever pot up. I would simply replace the compost every couple of years. Now if you did do what I did and actually made the plant really, really big, there is a way back. You can prune it right down. Once it starts growing again, you can actually knock it out of its large pot and you can root prune pelargonium. As long as you do it either now or in the late autumn, it will be fine and it will rejuvenate itself, and then you'll get your flowers again. Okay, let's talk pests. There are invisible pests on pelargoniums. There are mites on pelargoniums that you can't see. Yes, they do get spider mite, but they get other mites that are invisible even to a hand lens. So if yours looks like it's lacking vigour, it may be worth a spray. I tend to do a mixture of all sorts of things. I use sprays, I use contact sprays, I use systemic sprays, and I use a sulphur hot box. Not all at the same time, of course, but it's a good idea to rotate them, because then the mites, which are really, really resistant to these kind of treatments, then they don't get too used to anything. Next mistakes are to do with watering, as ever. Watering too frequently. It's only 12 degrees in here, they're not in full growth. Mine are only getting watered roughly every 7 to 10 days, and only then when they are really, really dry, and I'm not giving them much at all. If I keep them on the dry side, yes, they get yellowing leaves. I just strip those leaves off when that happens, but it means they're not going to be as prone to botrytis, and they're not going to be as prone to rot. And I have to say mine are looking really, really healthy this year. Finally, the last mistake is to do with temperature, and that's not keeping them frost free. The number of people I see that keep them outside, sometimes they do actually come through the winter and they will come again, but they'll look an absolute state. If they're in a protected area, they may well get through the odd little frost, but remember, these are not frost hardy plants on the whole. We're talking pelargoniums here, not hardy geraniums, even though in the States they still call them, by mistake, geraniums. They're not, they're pelargoniums, and pelargoniums are not frost hardy, so make sure you keep yours so long as it's roughly above 5 degrees. Obviously the more temperature you can add on to that, the better they're going to be. Some of them will even bloom during the winter months. I've got one over here that's in bud now. I'm happy to see that. Of course, if you're going for a show, you're going to be pinching those out, but for me, that's great. I'll let it bloom. So there's a few mistakes that you might want to avoid. I've made them all, so there's no shame in it. And if you want to see a few more care tips and see a tour of all mine when they were in bloom in the middle of June, then check out this video up here. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.